Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another interview with the Idea to Value podcast. I'm very happy to have Samuel West with me today, who is the curator of the Museum of Failure in Helsingborg, Sweden. Sam, it's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Now, a lot of people are probably asking themselves, what the heck is a Museum of Failure? Can you please just tell us what it is?
So the Museum of Failure is a collection of failed innovations that have, usually that means they're commercial flops, but they can there's all kinds of different ways products and services can fail on the market. The criteria for being in the museum is that they have to be an innovation in some way, business model, technology-wise, and design-wise, and they have to be a failure. And the definition of failure is that there's a deviation from expected or desired results or outcomes. So that's sort of, try to keep it as strict as possible, but of course there's always exceptions to the rules.
And can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you get this crazy idea to start a museum celebrating failed stuff?
The long version is that I was looking for a new way to communicate research findings. So there's a lot of research on learning from failure and how important it is for innovation, but this research doesn't really reach those who need the information. It drowns in sort of how many books and articles and blogs are out there. I wanted to find a different way to communicate it, and last year I was at the Museum of Broken Relationships in Zagreb, Croatia, and I saw how they had physical items along with stories and to convey an abstract thought of broken relationships. I realized that I had to open a museum.
And so what exactly is the museum? What's its ambition, and what sort of things have you got in there? Because for the people just listening to the podcast, we've got the video on YouTube as well. And Sam, you're actually in the museum right now, and we can see some things behind you.
So the whole purpose of the museum is to communicate how important failure is, or acceptance of failure is, for progress and for innovation. So by showcasing these products and services, I want to show that we can't have success in this context without also accepting failure. And the secondary message is that organizations need to improve their ability to learn from failure. The vast majority of organizations, regardless of how innovative they are actually pretty lousy when it comes to learning from failure.
And I think this feeds very well into this concept of failing as a sort of badge of honor that seems to be in Silicon Valley, compared to failing being the most dangerous thing in a lot of corporate environments. What's your view on that?
Sometimes I think that Silicon Valley gets an unfair good rep for about this because of their fail forward mentality, but and they might have an acceptance of failure, but they're not much better at learning from failure than anyone else is. So I don't think we should give them too much credit for that. Although there is an acceptance, which they should get credit for, and in startup cultures and contexts all over the world, it's very similar to Silicon Valley. But the rest of the United States is not better than Europe when it comes to learning from failure, not at all.
So we've got a couple of objects behind you in the museum, and I think you've got a couple that you want to talk about as well. Why don't you just take us through some of the objects in the museum and what sort of things we can learn from them?
Yeah, I've taken, because your audience are not complete newbies when it comes to innovation. I've chosen the ones that might not be so spectacular or so sort of media friendly. but that I think offer us quite a bit to learn from. This is one of my favorites right here. This is the Nokia N-Gage. So it's Nokia. Around the turn of the century, people had gaming consoles and a phone in their pocket. So Nokia, who was the top dog at the time, they combined the two into one unit. So it's a great little piece of technology. The failure was multiple failures. It started with the design. So although the phone works good and it actually is quite good as a gaming device, to change the game you had to take apart the entire phone to change the game. You had to take out the battery. That's not really smart design if it's a gaming phone. Also, it had to be held sideways to your head to make phone calls, which it earned them. It became mocked. It was mocked as the taco phone because you had to hold it like this. But the main problem was also that Nokia didn't work in the implementation phase where they sort of neglected the game developers. So there were only 2 good games on this phone. The rest were pretty crap. And you can't have a gaming phone that only has 2 games.
Now,
So
Nokia at this point was still the biggest hotshot when it came to mobile
they were
phones.
the Apple of then, yes.
And Nokia did end up failing as a company. Do you think this product sort of indicates what was going on within Nokia that led to that, or do you think it was a one-off?
Unfortunately, it's not a one-off because Nokia failed at many products before they ultimately lost their position there at the throne. And one of the better analysis of Nokia sort of in a broader sense failure is that the organizational culture was that of you only report positive news up towards upwards in the hierarchy. So the top management of Nokia didn't know how bad the situation was because they only got the good news. And so you only got promoted if you reported good news. So, and that's problematic because you need the bad news as well. You need to know when things flop, otherwise you can't correct it.
So that's one example. Have you got any other failed innovations that we want to talk about?
I've got, there's another one that's sort of, it's not that popular at the museum, but I like it. This is the Blockbuster, a DVD rental case from Blockbuster. Let's see what movie it is. Oh, Platoon.
Yeah.
So, so this one is actually good because the story of Blockbuster. They had 9,000 stores all over the world, and they were huge. They were not a monopoly, but as close as you can get. And they made, they were very profitable. They saw that internet streaming was the future. So the CEO at the time, he invested into internet streaming, and they were actually really, it was quite good. What happened was there was a conflict on the highest management level in the boardroom where they wanted to maintain the profits from the late fees. Do you remember? Are you old enough to remember late fees?
I used to use Blockbuster back in the day, so yes.
So, so late fees for you young people out there is when you didn't return your DVD on time, you were punished with the late fees. And I think some estimates put the profits of Blockbuster, a third of their profits came from late fees. That's huge. And the reason they didn't continue to invest, they fired the CEO who wanted to invest in streaming, and got a CEO that did as he was told, and they killed the streaming project. And a few years later, Netflix killed Blockbuster. I think it's a great, that's a condensed version of the story. I think it's a great story of, they had it all right, but greed got in the way.
So in that case, it was failure as not necessarily ignoring the bad news, but just trying to stick with what had previously worked for them.
Exactly, and not seeing that they have to change their business model. I have another one if you're interested in the business model.
Absolutely. Let's keep going.
This is the KODAK DC40.
And for people who are listening, it's a digital camera. Looks like that's about the size of a toaster.
It's not that big.
Okay, it's a bit smaller, but it's a pretty big.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's it's a nice it's Kodak's first digital camera for consumers. And it was hugely successful. Kodak was actually hugely successful at making. They were pioneers in the manufacture of digital cameras. Interesting. They actually created the first prototype. You could say that Kodak invented the digital camera back in the 70s. According to, I don't know if they're rumors or anyway, according to what I've read, the engineer that created the first prototype showed it to management, and they clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Oh, that's cute. Let's not tell anybody about it." So they were afraid that the digital camera would threaten their profitable film printing business model, which the entire Kodak sort of lived on. And anyway, fast forward, the rest of the world was catching up, so Kodak got into the game. They were really good at the cameras were excellent quality and a commercial success. Kodak even launched a photo sharing site called OPhoto back in 2001, I believe. And it was like a image sharing service. It was actually pretty good. The problem was that Kodak insisted on, and stubbornly insisted on, that their cameras, the photo sharing site, everything they did was geared towards getting consumers to print more photos. So they made their money printing the photos, hence everything they did was, if you bought a camera, it wasn't to have the photos on the screen, it was so you could print them out at home. Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So you also know where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
In 2012, they went bankrupt because cameras are everywhere. We don't print our photos anymore. We keep them in the computer. And because Kodak didn't change their business model, they had no reason to exist any longer. The really sort of ironic thing is that the same year, some people put it at the same week, I'm not actually sure about that Kodak went bankrupt. Instagram was sold to Facebook for $1 billion. So it's really like Kodak, you had everything. You had the patents, you had the knowledge, you could see sort of what was happening, but you refused to change your business model, and now they basically don't exist.
I think this is a case study that everyone really needs to understand quite well from an innovation perspective, because it's one of the things that a lot of companies are going to struggle with if they try and innovate within the company in the sense of having a separate unit that's doing innovation, an innovation lab.
Yeah. Or focusing it all in the R&D department. I mean, that worked well in the 50s and 60s. It doesn't quite work like that today.
Because my interpretation of your story is that all the technology was there and they were actually a market leader, but the company couldn't figure out the right strategy to incorporate this future-facing new type of business into the existing business. It's what we call an ambidextrous organization that needs to look both into the current space and into the future space.
Absolutely, and an organization that, I mean, there's plenty of examples of disruptive technology that kills entire sectors, let alone entire companies. But I mean, if you're part of that disruptive innovation, then and you are willing to adapt your business models, like, I mean, had Blockbuster, had they been willing to say, we're not going to rent DVDs and then charge people for late fees, we're going to do like Netflix, you pay a monthly fee, you can keep the videos as long as you want to. You get new ones when we return them, but change your business model, they would still be in business. Netflix would never have existed with these giants as competitors.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of examples of specific failures. What I'd like to talk to you about now is why is there this angst around failure, and why is it something that seems to happen in more or less every company? So, what
Yeah,
distinguishes from a company that is failing from one that seems to be able to succeed no matter what?
I think if we sort of limit it to failure and acceptance of failure, when it comes to innovation, the companies that are successful, I really like Google's sort of innovation approach, where, and I know everybody's tired, me too, of saying, "Oh, look at Google, let's be inspired by their awesomeness." But excuse me there. They the approach is, they throw money. If you have an idea, you get funding right away, regardless of how stupid your idea is. And then throughout the entire process of receiving more, reporting and receiving more funding, um, the reference group tries to kill the idea. And if your idea can't be killed, it goes on to the next phase. And there's something beautiful about that. Like, to start off, you get the funding, you get the resources, and then it's your responsibility also to say, like, okay, as the project grows, if it can be killed, it's killed, and we put the resources on new projects. But if not, it survives, and that's sort of an evolutionary approach. That's how evolution works for life. The survival of the fittest, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't also work for innovation.
Now, before we started the recording, you also mentioned something from your own background, which was in psychology, and something related to failure is a concept of psychological safety. Could you tell
Yeah.
us a bit more about that?
So the research, this is a fascinating concept, at least in this context, and it's psychological safety basically means a perceived feeling or sense within a group, a team, or a small company, where it's okay to take interpersonal risks. Now, that means, for example, that you're willing to share your unrefined ideas, you're willing to ask the uncomfortable questions or maybe stupid questions, you're willing to ask for help, you're willing to do activities or behaviors within that group without the fear of being negatively judged. So the original research about 20 years ago was on healthcare teams, so medical teams. And they found that the teams that had psychological safety, they talked about their failures, and they learned from their failures together without pointing the finger, without finding scapegoats, without pointing the blame anywhere. And they reported their failures to, I don't know how they did it, the quality control or the management of the hospital. And compared to other teams who didn't have this psychological safety, they didn't report their errors because nobody actually dared to talk about them. And when measuring the performance of these teams, there was a huge difference. The ones who talked about their errors and mistakes, they were much more high performing and more effective as a medical team. So the researchers, does this make any sense to you?
Yeah, no, this it makes sense.
So the researchers, Edmondson is the main sort of researcher behind this, Amy Edmondson. She, like, wait a second, what's going on in these high-performing teams? And the result of those studies led to the concept of psychological safety. And the concept has been sort of, it hasn't gotten any attention for the last, like I say, 15, 20 years. And then recently, actually last year, Google released their report on what their internal findings on what characterizes a high-performing, innovative team. And their findings was that psychological safety was a key issue here. It's more important than management. It's more important than team composition or skills or experience. It's how the group works together.
So
Yeah, I'm fascinated.
I mean, I love the concept because it seems to go into the process of innovating and really differentiate failure during experimentation compared to failure overall. Is that
Yes.
something fair to say?
Yes, I think that's like that's you and I taking the concept of psychological safety into our work with innovation. But yes, I definitely agree with you. And when it comes to learning from failure, teams, companies that have a higher degree of psychological safety are much more inclined to actually benefit, or not benefit from failures, but actually be able to learn from their failures than teams where you can't even talk about mistakes or failures.
Sam, it's been wonderful speaking with you. We're coming up to the end of the interview, but I wanted to ask you one last thing. If you've got
Go.
one tip of everything that you've learned around safety, either as examples of catastrophic failure or around failure as part of the experimentation program, what can companies do now to become less susceptible to major failure?
I think, okay, that's a wrong thing to ask a researcher to reduce it down to one point. But I think one key issue is to distinguish between failure that you can live with and then the big catastrophic failure. And many organizations, they don't distinguish between the two. So they see all failure as something to be avoided at all costs. So if you can see, like, okay, we don't want failure where people die or people get hurt. Let's avoid that at all costs. Yes, but the failure in the innovation process of exploring paths that might be dead ends or experimentation that doesn't go as planned or desired, those failures we can live with. They cost a bit of money and a bit of resources, but not more than that. So let's fail. Yeah, let's fail in the smaller context, and by learning from those failures, we can avoid those big, massive catastrophes.
Sam, it's been wonderful getting your insights. If people want to find out more about the Museum of Failure and your work, where can they go to find out more?
The best bet is museumoffailure.se. I did buy the museumoffailure.com, but I misspelled museum, so
so that's a failure in itself.
So go to museumoffailure.se.
Okay. Sam, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking
Likewise.
again with you soon.
Thank you.
Today's episode was made possible by members of our premium Deep Creativity training program. For less than the price of half a candy bar per day, you too can get world-exclusive daily exercises which push your creativity past its comfort barrier to make you better able to generate ideas in all aspects of your life and work. Invest in yourself now by going to www.ideatovalue.com/deepcreativity and using coupon code PODCAST for 25% off your first order. And don't forget that if you found this episode interesting, to like and share it, and to leave us a review in your favorite podcast player. See you again in the next episode.